on, you got to seize the goddamn gap. People are so goddamn inefficient. Oh, god damn it! I don't care if you're old, seize the gap!
Welcome to Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. I am Jamie G. Esquire, the fifth master of the hot one.
Boy, it sure is a hot one today, huh?
I'm here with Magnum Mills, and we're going to help you get ready for the playoffs in your season-long fantasy football leagues. It's go time.
It's go time, it's playoff time, and I am Magnum Mills, and I am legally obligated to point out that we are in no way, shape, or form affiliated with Hot Ones. Just go ahead and play the late 90s hip-hop because it's nothing but the Hot Boys on Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We are on social media at Seize the Gap FF. Do not forget it, and do not forget those flaps. Follow, like, and please subscribe. That's all we ask. If we help you with something, if you have a little fun, please give us that one little thumb.
And are you old enough to remember the Ronco rotisserie oven? If you are, then you remember where we're stealing the name from. If not, we totally claim ownership of Set It and Forget It. Mills, who are the set it and forget it quarterbacks for the fantasy playoffs?
Yeah, but just like it sounds, if you have any of these guys, you go ahead, you put them in there, you start them every week. You don't worry about the matchup, barring injury or crazy blizzard or any other extenuating circumstances. You're not affiliated in any way with Ronco. Set it and forget it quarterbacks are Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, Justin Fields. Not every one of them has a great game every week, but the upside is there. They have good floors. They're not guys that you need to pull out of your lineup. And honestly, it's entirely possible you have two or even more of those guys, but that's a first world problem. We don't really care about that. You're going to have to figure out that one yourself. But if you don't have one of these guys, you're going to need a plan for the playoffs. In Jamie G, Kenny Loggins is available, so you're all I've got. Tell me, who are your danger zone playoff quarterbacks?
I'll tell you, but before I do, you guys got to understand the beauty of that. You just said it, and then you forget it.
It's a whole rotisserie chicken in your own house. I mean, you don't have to go to the store and buy one of those, $8 chickens. It's right there.
It's incredible. It's right up there with cornball, minus the burns.
Yeah, and the vacuum haircut thing from Wayne's World, that was pretty good too. The suck and suck or something. That's sucking it.
Yeah. Well, and didn't they have a cool ass licorice thing in the car too? I don't know. Anyway, we could go on and on. We've got a couple of quarterbacks here who have been useful fantasy assets who are in the danger zone. And it's my way to the danger zone. When it comes to fantasy playoffs, let's talk about them right now. Number one, Sam Howell. I mean, week 15 at the Rams, that's not too bad, but he's at the Jets in week 16 and then San Francisco in week 17. I don't feel over the moon about that lineup heading in. I mean, you could see Washington kind of flounder down the stretch. What if they fire, if they lose another game or two, it's possible that they're going to fire Rivera. I mean, reports already came out that they don't plan to see him there next season, but want him to finish the season. How long before you lose the team completely here? I'm a little worried about Sam Howell. Next up, we got Jared Goff. One of the absolute worst schedules for a quarterback in the playoffs. He's at, versus Denver, at Minnesota, and then at Dallas. 3 tough defenses in a row. And I don't know about you, but the last couple of games here, bad Jared showed up, and it's not like he went to Jared. Like, no, this is bad.
Like the Subway Jared. It's like Subway Jared.
Yeah, yes, very bad, like the Subway Jared, which is absolutely incredibly bad. Maybe it's not that bad, but it's in that realm in terms of his play. And Detroit's just looked like they've not been able to move the ball with the explosive plays, and they're more of kind of a running team, more so than passing. So I just worry about that, and I don't like the lineup. Number 3, Tua Tagovailoa. Pretty brutal stretch here in the playoffs. He's got the Jets, Dallas, and then at Baltimore. Look, quietly, Tua hasn't exceeded 20 fantasy points since week 6 versus Carolina. We saw what they've done and what he's done against teams with winning records. It hasn't been pretty. He scored less than 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games. The flame has dimmed. Let's just put it that way. Miami's defense has absolutely improved, but Miami might seek to run the ball more, control the clock, play that type of game, especially if they find themselves in bad weather and or Tua continues to struggle like this from a fantasy standpoint. I don't love the Mills. They're all kind of in the danger zone.
Yeah, I think Tua is probably the one you could maybe get away with the most. It just comes down to touchdowns for him. And you can see again, they get A-Chain healthy, Mostert stayed healthy. I can see them leaning into into the running game down the stretch. You know, how you worry, he's probably one of those guys. If you're in a scoring system that really penalizes for sacks, for turnovers, that kind of thing, I'm going to be a lot further down on Howell. If you don't have any negative points, I don't mind so much because he can get there with GTP then. And Goff's going to be another guy like Tua, kind of, he doesn't get the raw counting numbers, so it's really going to come down to how they score their touchdowns, and they seem to want to score most from via David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So that's not a great thing for Goff. He's not really a threat to run many in. You know, St. Brown really isn't a dominant red zone target, neither is Jameson Williams. They really only have Sam Laporta as their big body down there. So again, I can see Goff being fairly serviceable, but I don't know that you're going to be getting 20 plus points from him down the stretch. And this is the fantasy playoffs, man. You need all the points you can get. It does not help you if the team wins a game in the NFL. You don't get points for that in most of the leagues I played in. And I've been playing in fantasy leagues long enough to remember quarterbacks just coming out of nowhere to carry teams to their fantasy championships. Tim Tebow, Colin Kaepernick was pretty wild, but especially I very much remember Blake Bortles just carrying my squad one year. Him and Dion Lewis just doing work, man. It was crazy. I had no business winning that title, yet I did. It was pretty awesome, and maybe still the best thing Blake Bortles ever did outside of his family. I'm sure he has a wonderful family and made lots of money.
Yeah, all true. Yeah, much like the hot ones, the wild ones can be the most rewarding. Absolutely true there. But there's some risk when it comes with that, which is even more true. It's only facts only on this show. Mills, are there any QBs on the waiver wire in a majority of leagues that could be useful in the playoffs, fantasy playoffs?
Well, it took a while to get these because we are a fax only league and not that many places have fax machines anymore. So I'm really
True.
just waiting there and you hear the beep, beep, and you just wait and you wait and you wait. It's really annoying. As far as the waiver wire quarterbacks, there are a couple out there. I'll start off the top with Matthew Stafford. He's out there in 69% of ESPN leagues. Shout out Bill and Ted. Playoff schedule is versus Washington, versus New Orleans, at the Giants. We saw here the return of Kyron Williams gave him a big boost. He had his best game of the year in week 12. For Stafford, it's really come down to throwing touchdown passes. He's put up decent counting stats, but has just not managed to find the end zone very much. He gives you basically nothing on the ground, so you can't really hope for, the occasional maybe one random 1 yard rushing touchdown, something like that. But given that schedule, the way they look, Kupp being healthy, Puka Nacua finally being in there, Kyron Williams, it's really the first time all year they have all of their weapons. So I can see him being very useful down the stretch, again, out there in 69% of leagues. Then you have Jordan Love, who's available in 52% of ESPN leagues. Again, another very good playoff schedule versus Tampa Bay, at Carolina, at Minnesota. Minnesota is really the only one that's probably scaring you too much there. He's had at least 2 touchdown passes in each of his last 3 games. Seems like he might have turned a corner. Would really help if Christian Watson is truly asserting himself. Would like to see Aaron Jones get back in there. But again, good schedule, got some weapons, see what happens. He's out there and again, more than half the leagues. And finally, Russell Wilson. I'm fudging a little bit. He's only available in 43% of ESPN leagues, but he is out there. Definitely been more of a floor option. You have to like the schedule, though, at Detroit versus New England versus the Chargers. I believe that is the absolute best fantasy playoff schedule for any quarterback. Again, you might not be looking at a lot of 25, 30-point ceiling, but it really wouldn't surprise me to see him, score somewhere between 15 and 25 points in all 3 of those games down the stretch, which would be very huge for you in fantasy leagues, especially if you're still looking for a quarterback at this point of the season.
Yeah, those are some real creepers, and I like it. And sometimes one guy is not enough to get the job done. You either need a dynamic duo or you need to crank it all the way up to a 3-way. Mills, any options here?
Well, you can buy the joints now that they're just battery powered, so you don't have to worry about cords or anything. Outside of that, I think you want to try to kind of pair some guys up. Like, let's say you have Kyler Murray. They have a very tough schedule as far as their week 15 matchup against San Francisco, but the Raiders are home versus the Chargers. Great schedule there. Then Arizona closes out at Chicago, at Philadelphia. Weather could be an issue, but I think you're going to like Kyler Murray in both of those matchups. So that's a nice way just to pair him up, maybe move off of that San Francisco game because we've seen them give quarterbacks trouble ever since they came out of that rough stretch.
Well, CJ Stroud has looked absolutely great, but when you watch the film of their pass defense, it's hard not to think, Houston, we have a problem. Will Levis, the quarterback in Tennessee, and whoever the quarterback for Cleveland is, give you an all Houston playoff schedule. Week 15, Tennessee at Houston. I like this. Week 16, Cleveland at Houston. I like this. And week 17, Tennessee at Houston. I like that again. A little bit concerning, just two out of 3 weeks playing the same team. But in reality, there's 3 possible shootouts here, all of which should be played in good weather. I mean, the only away game is Tennessee. I like it here. I just think that these games could all be potentially, 28-31, 41-38 type games.
Yeah, or 10-7. The only good part is I think CJ Stroud has gotten to the point where he can score enough points that it's going to force the other team to score. And the Houston defense has been, again, decent pass rush, but they're just giving up points. Just watching them, it seemed like Trevor Lawrence could do whatever he wants. We saw Tampa Bay put up some points on them. It's, again, I think you're not looking to win the game. You're just looking for that fantasy production. I like what you're doing there, again, especially if you're in a deeper league, you don't have a lot of other options. Levis might be out there, and I can basically guarantee you Dorial Robinson-Thompson or whoever, who knows, might even be Joe Flacco at that point. Would I have the balls to start Joe Flacco in a fantasy playoff game? I started Blake Bortles. Why not? You could also go down, maybe do a little NFC South stack up Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr. Week 15, Tampa's at Green Bay. Not too bad. Week 16, Tampa's home versus Jacksonville. Again, we saw Stroud light them up. And then week 17, New Orleans is at Tampa Bay. So kind of just using both sides of it a little bit there. Theoretically, then you'd have the option. You could always play Mayfield if you wanted there. I just think that the Tampa Bay defense is another one you want to attack. They did get beat by the Colts on the ground a little bit more, but for the most part, they've been a funnel defense where all the production tends to come by the wide receivers, maybe the running backs in the air. So I think there's definitely something you could get there, even though Derek Carr has been a little bit shaky. And again, Baker, the Tampa Bay defense is putting them in spots where they have to throw the ball. And, Baker Mayfield is very quietly like the QB 14 on the air.
Very quietly, but it needs to be said. Mills, I think I can offer a couple variations of what you already put out there. You could swap Gardner Minshew week 16 at Atlanta, and you could put him in for Cleveland quarterback to pair with Will Levis. I really like that. We all know Minshew, super high floor option, but some of the Cleveland quarterbacks have 0 floor. So you got to consider that. You could also consider whoever starts for the New York Giants in week 16 at Philadelphia. It could be Tyrod Taylor coming back. It could be Tommy DeVito. Either way, Philadelphia might be winning games. They might be giving up a ton of passing yards and touchdowns. Who knows? They could be also benching their, they could be not even playing their starters. So could work with Levis or Russell Wilson.
I like that. I mean, I think kind of wishful thinking that week 16 we're resting some starters, but that would be super cool. And then you get at the point, is that too much? You're resting them too early now. That opens up a whole nother can of worms because it's football and you have to debate both sides of everything. And speaking of debating both sides of everything, before we move on, I need to point out that the Carolina Panthers have like a top 3 playoff schedule, 4 quarterbacks. Dude, is there any chance that firing Frank Reich somehow makes Bryce Young an option you could consider in your fantasy playoffs, or is that just too far? You'd rather go ahead and put Tommy DeVito in there?
Give me DeVito. Give me the chicken cutlets. Give me the palm. It's Tommy DeVito all day. No, not a chance. I don't care if they bring back Vince Lombardi. I don't care if Mike Shanahan comes out of the grave. No.
So you'd start Danny DeVito over Bryce Young? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, Jersey Mike's is basically the same thing as Tommy DeVito.
It's a better version in my opinion. Yes, I would take Danny DeVito over Bryce Young. Sorry, Bryce Young.
Impossible.
Sorry,
you can't
fans.
tackle Danny DeVito. He is just short, stout, and covered in sausage grease. He's impossible to tackle.
Dude, he's the warthog, man. Come on, dude. Guy's an animal.
Can't go against a warthog.
No way. No way. Every season, there's at least one running back who comes out of nowhere down the stretch. Mills, give us some running backs who might fit that bill, who are still out there on most waiver wires in most leagues.
Yeah, you're basically entering handcuff speculation world. Maybe you're trying to prey on a couple guys who you think might get some burn down the stretch if the teams want to let the young guys get a look. I think obviously you want to look to the better teams. San Francisco has Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason. You're looking for them to either be the handcuff to Christian McCaffrey, or if they somehow were, resting guys down the stretch, week 17, maybe get them in there. Pretty much exact similar analysis for Kenneth Gainwell and Rashad Penny over in Philadelphia. Probably takes an injury for them to be usable, but if that did occur, they would be very viable down the stretch and could be in play if the Eagles wind up clinching early. Tyjae Spears over in Tennessee did not have the greatest week here, but he has really been splitting that job with Derrick Henry. If Tennessee falls out of it, perhaps they go more to him down the stretch. Tyler Algier of the Falcons, top tier handcuff. It pretty much would take an injury from Bijan to get there, but if that injury did occur, Tyler Algier is probably a back end RB1. And then we have my man, Roshan Johnson up in Chicago. Right now, he's benefiting from Dante Foreman being hurt. I know they have Khalil Herbert there who's running ahead of him, but Herbert will be a free agent next year. Not impossible to give Johnson an increased workload down the stretch. Over in Minnesota, you have Ty Chandler, who has more or less turned that into a straight split with Alexander Madison. I think that Ty Chandler is the more talented running back and can see increased time down the stretch. We've seen Keaton Mitchell down in Baltimore look decent, still out there in over half of ESPN leagues. He's not going to be featured. You're probably maxing out at around 10 touches a game, but dude has got some grease lightning going on. He's always a threat for a long touchdown. And when you're dumpster diving like this, a long touchdown, decent game that gets you 14, 15 PPR points, you are in business. And Jeff Wilson in Miami. We've seen this show before. I think Miami could get more run heavy down the stretch, go with the hot hand a little bit. You saw that happen for a while in the Jets game till it got out of hand. Then it was more Mostert down the stretch. So if he's out there, he's definitely worth owning. Michael Carter over at Arizona. It's only his second week on the team. He's already risen to be the RB2. Took almost all the passing game work away from James Conner in week 12. Of all of these guys, he is probably my absolute priority right now. I'd say him, Mitchell, Roshan Johnson, I'm near the top. And then finally, you've got Chase Brown over in Cincinnati. If they choose to, kind of go with some of the young guys down the stretch, especially because Mixon probably won't be there next year, I could see him getting a look. And Rico Dowdle over in Dallas. He's emerged as the clear handcuff to Tony Pollard. Again, the Cowboys might be put in a situation where they don't have anything to play for the last couple of games. It wouldn't surprise me to see them get him more involved. And if something happened to Tony Pollard, he would, again, probably be right up there that, high-end RB2 range. So all these guys should be on your bench if possible. We're past the buys for the most part coming up here. So once you're past them, put as many speculative running backs on your bench as you can for the most part.
Well, if we tried to break down all the wide receivers, we'd be here for hours and hours and hours. Instead, I think we'll each just give 2 wide receivers who we would believe will come up huge for fantasy owners during the playoffs. Let's go every other here, Mills. Who you got as your first?
All right, I'm used to doing the ever other. That's usually how the Quad City DJs thing works. It may be a little bit chalky, but I am going to go with Rashee Rice of the Chiefs. Really saw him kind of break out against the Raiders. Maybe it was a Kadarius Toney injury, maybe not. I just think down the stretch, the Chiefs are going to simplify things a little bit. They're going to quit trying to work 5, 6 different receivers in. He's the best one they have. I think they tighten the game plan up. They really focus on Pacheco, Kelsey, and Rice. So I can see him being a top 12, top 15-ish receiver down the stretch. And right now, he's more like the wide receiver 36, wide receiver 40 of the season. How about you, man? Who's going to carry these fantasy teams down the playoff stretch?
I am going to go down to Jacksonville and give me a little Zay Jones. I know that there's a lot of mouths to feed. I think when he is healthy, he finds himself with the big playability. He's also one of I think their best go up and get it receiver, catching the contested ball. A little bit touchdown dependent, but give me Zay Jones, man. I'd feel pretty good about plugging him in, digging pretty deep there. I think he's got the potential to put up some points here down the stretch for Jacksonville. I like any piece of that offense. I know he's, he hasn't been there for the bulk of the season. He's been hurt in and out. I think he's back, and I think he's back in a big way. Give me Zay Jones.
I like that. See, that is digging deep. He is out there. We've seen him be a red zone threat somehow. He makes like the best contested catches of anybody in the league.
He does.
If he's wide open, it's like don't throw it to Featherstone. But if he is covered by 2 dudes in the absolute corner of the end zone, somehow he's at least going to come down with it. Also probably has more great catches that weren't fully inbounds than anybody else. But he's at least fun to watch. I like picking somebody off that offense. I think that's a good one. And down the stretch here, I am going to go over to Pittsburgh and go with the George Pickens breakout. I'm going to buy into the changing of the offensive coordinator a little bit here. And the fact that Deontay Johnson just seems like he's been extra salty. I don't know that the team is happy with him. You saw him drop another touchdown this week. I really feel that they're going to start to focus on where their bread is buttered. That's run the ball, get it to Pickens, get it to Pat Freiermuth. So I'm thinking we finally get to see George Pickens, wide receiver 1, down the stretch. You know, I don't care if he complains a bunch to get it as long as it works, because I could see him just, you know, again, going absolutely nuclear down the stretch, 100 yards a game, 5 touchdowns, something like that. Some Nas, man. So he could be into some big things. Who's your second wide receiver breakout for the
Into
playoffs?
some big things. I like it. You know, I so badly want to go with my boy in Houston with Nico Collins, but I'm not going to. Although I think you could be worse off than Nico Collins. He might be a touchdown dependent, and you know Tank Dell's getting all the love, and you're sharing some things. But that offense is just going to spread it around and score points because they have to. But I'm not going to go. I'm not going to do what everyone thinks I'm going to do and go Nico Collins. Instead, I'm going to travel to Green Bay and I'm going to go with Christian Watson. I know that he's been spotty at best. I think they're going to be in some games where there's some shootout type potential, and I think they're going to be playing from behind. I'm gonna ride him here, man. I'm gonna ride the connection between Love and Watson. And again, I think you could do worse than having Christian Watson here down the stretch.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for here. That kind of guy who has been, you drafted him with a decent pick. He's been sitting there on your bench. You don't know when to start him. You know, wouldn't it be grand if all of a sudden he comes through and is just the man down the stretch in the playoffs? We would enjoy that, but honestly, let's just be fair here. Nobody actually enjoys talking about tight ends, right? Unless you own Travis Kelce or Dalton Kincaid or Sam Laporta or one of the cool ones, one of the ones that actually make a difference. Nobody wants to hear about your problems between, you know, David Njoku and Darnell Parham or whatever you're doing out there, Logan Thomas. Jamie G, how do you want to handle the black hole position?
Oh, man, I just kind of don't want to handle it. I'm just putting Dalton Kincaid in my lineups, and I think that's it for me. That's my set it and forget it. Oh, man, if you got him, smoke him. Why don't you enlighten us, though? Give us what we're really going to do.
Well, I mean, I guess you could go bad news Bears, but I don't want to make Chicago mad. So let's do good news, bad news. And if you've been starting one of these tight ends all season, I have some bad news for you when you get to the playoffs. You got Dalton Schultz, absolutely terrible schedule in the playoffs for fantasy tight ends, and he saw his snap count get cut in half with the return of Brevin Jordan this week. And you've got Cole Kmet, second hardest schedule down the stretch for the Bears. Who knows if they'll be actively trying to win games at that point in the season? God forbid Justin Fields gets hurt again. Although I guess he did do all right with Badgett, but it is what it is. Tyler Conklin, third toughest schedule for fantasy tight ends down the stretch. Who knows what happens with that offense? What quarterback is starting by the time we get to the fantasy playoffs? Not great, especially because the schedule is so good for the Jets wide receivers. Dallas Goedert of the Eagles, still not playing, has not gone on IR. He will be back by the playoffs, but the schedule's not great. Again, the Eagles have some clinching scenarios in play. Not sure if you're going to feel the most comfortable about starting Goddard every week. And finally, Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys, fifth worst fantasy playoff schedule for tight ends. Another guy who's seeing some of the other tight ends get hit, you know, cut into his snap count, into his target share. Wouldn't surprise me to see his production let up down the stretch. But if you've been streaming the position or you've gotten hit with injuries, I have some good news for you about tight ends in the fantasy playoffs. Daniel Bellinger, Darren Waller, whoever it is, Giants have an excellent schedule, as do the Bucs. Shout out Cade Otton, who's been better than you think this year. We just saw Tyler Higbee have a nice game. He's been cut in a lot of leagues. If that Rams offense gets hot down the stretch, he could be a big part of it. Probably their best red zone threat as far as someone they can throw it to. Michael Mayer, rookie for the Raiders, has seen his role grow already since Pierce took over as head coach. I would very much think they'll feature him down the stretch. Again, nice schedule. Chigo Kokwo, Tennessee Titans tight end. You know, I really want Treylon Burks to get back, but right now their passing game is basically DeAndre Hopkins and some crickets who happen to be out on the field with him. I would like to see Coco get more involved. And finally, Juan Johnson of the Saints, been a bit up and down this year. One of their better red zone targets when Taysom Hill isn't stealing all the touchdowns. They had a couple injuries there. Michael Thomas is out. Shaheed went down. Olave went down. So if they're banged up, he could step in there. And finally, I guess I should know, just to make Jamie G happy, if you know, there are a couple of decent fantasy playoff schedules for tight ends that you have been starting every week. And those tight ends with the best fantasy playoff schedule are Evan Ingram, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle, and Kyle Pitts. So it's at least mildly good news if you have some of that.
You know why they call it Hollywood instead of Hollywood these days? because we stole the D. No, we didn't. I'm kidding. We stole the B. And I'm doing a BoJack Horseman thing here, not a PCU thing. Can you show me where the campus is? Maybe you can. Chips, chips, chips. I don't know. But what are we doing with the D for the fantasy playoffs?
Well, I think you were doing both a BoJack thing and a PCU thing, but I enjoy the references, so I will allow it. I would say just right off the top, if you've been riding the Baltimore defense, and you probably have, a lot of people drafted them because they played Arizona in week 1. Talk about set it and forget it. I have leagues where they were in their week 1. I have not made a change the entire season. It's been great. Their fantasy playoff schedule is not great. Jacksonville, San Francisco, Miami, all teams that can put points up. I think they've been good enough that if you want to keep starting them, no matter the matchup, I started them against the Chargers this week, you can go ahead and do it. But I think it's just something you need to keep in mind. Maybe if nothing else, have another option on your bench just in case they get hit with injuries or start running a little bit cold, something like that.
Well, there's a couple of teams you could probably start all 3 weeks of the playoffs if you wanted to. The Atlanta Falcons, I mean, their next 3 matchups are Carolina, Indy, and Chicago. You really like those. Definitely 2 out of the 3 there for sure. Philadelphia Eagles, I mean, they've got Seattle, the Giants, and Arizona. Again, really nice playoff schedule for their defense down the stretch, particularly if you're getting awarded for sacks and things like that. New Orleans, they've got the Giants, the Rams, and Tampa Bay. And then we've got the Rams with Washington, New Orleans, and the Giants. So I think the Giants are included in almost all those except Atlanta's schedule. So pretty good options there down the stretch if you just want to set it and forget it.
Yeah, you do want to target the worst teams definitely down the stretch. I mean, at that point, if the Giants are trying to win games, they're screwing themselves over, basically. They should be actively trying to lose at that point. And they're probably the only team on this list that will be in that zone. I would say everyone else is probably at least trying. I mean, Carolina, right? I feel bad, Carolina, but you need to try. Maybe Chicago will be taking a little bit, but that's about it. I would say, kind of along the lines of the Baltimore Ravens, if you have the Cleveland Browns DST, I think you could keep riding with them, but I don't really like their Week 16 matchup against Houston. Again, we've been seeing CJ Stroud put points up on everybody, and the Cleveland defense has been leaking a little bit of late. So I'd maybe go ahead, pick up the Denver DST. So you could use them in week 16. I think that would be a nice way to play that off again. If you have one of these defenses that you've kind of been using all season and you're hesitant to go away from down the stretch.
Well, there's actually a bunch of decent 1-week options here for week 16. I say a bunch, but certainly a handful here, maybe more. Arizona taking on Chicago. Denver taking on New England, as Mills mentioned. Washington taking on the Jets. Again, you love any team playing the Jets offense right now. You also like the unders in those games. The Jets taking on Washington. Again, you like the Jets' ability to hinder Washington and maybe create some turnovers. Chicago taking on Arizona, and then Green Bay taking on Carolina, which is just uber attractive here down the stretch for week 16.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can nitpick Chicago a little bit if you think Arizona's going to take off, but they're another team that wouldn't surprise me if they're not super motivated to be going as hard as they possibly could down the stretch. I mean, either side in that Arizona-Chicago game, you could probably argue for taking the defense. Again, same thing in the Washington Jets game. That's just a good place to be going against those offenses when you're a DST. I'll dogpile on Green Bay a little bit. They also get Tampa Bay in week 15, Minnesota in week 17. And you've got Buffalo plays New England and Indy, who plays Vegas. They're kind of both interesting week 17 options if you want to pair them up with Green Bay, maybe. The Bills are still owned in a few leagues. Indy is out there in a lot of leagues, despite being a top 10 DST this year.
Well, you could argue that you could also use the Jets in week 17 when they play the Browns. You just want to avoid their games versus Miami in week 15. And you could actually just go ahead and pair them with Miami and be in really good shape if you could do that. You could also look at the Chargers for week 15. I think that's a solid one as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that already play out with the Jets and the Dolphins once. And as far as the rest of the top DSTs, Dallas has a bit of a rough schedule. Buffalo, Miami, Detroit. But could you really bench the Dallas defense at this point? I think they have more defensive touchdowns than New England in the past little bit or something like that. Probably not true, but it feels like it's close. Pittsburgh schedule is pretty solid. Indy, Cincy, Seattle, not great. Enough to keep rolling there. Do be aware, though, they've picked up some injuries at this point. That Seattle has been out there, but that's mostly off the back of a couple of huge games they've had, especially the one against the Giants. They play Philadelphia, Tennessee, Pittsburgh. Other than the Eagles game, not that bad, but I don't know. I'd feel great about rolling them out there every week in your playoffs. And San Francisco is one who's got a decent kind of twofer. They have Arizona, Baltimore, Washington. Those are two pretty good matchups, sandwich around the Baltimore matchup, which is not great, Bob, right in the middle. And I think that really does it for kickers. I think that really does it for DSTs. But you know what? We're not doing kickers. If you need a kicker, find a healthy one who kicks for a functional offense, and they have a dome game or a game with good weather. Hope to get lucky. That's it. Congratulations. You found yourself a kicker.
And I think that about does it. Anything else before we get out of here?
Just know your leagues. Again, know when the playoffs start. Are there waiver wire rules where if you drop somebody, they're locked and they can't be picked up? Is there a waiver deadline? Is your trade deadline somehow not still passed? How many positions are paid out? You should know all those things. Take a look around your league, know who's still in it, and try to plan ahead a little bit. Yeah, we're doing this as week 13 hasn't even started yet. We're talking about week 15, but that's because you need to be 2 weeks ahead at this point. If you wait too long, everyone else is going to be doing this. You need to be ahead of the game. So start planning for your playoffs now, even if you're not 100% sure you're going to get in. You might have to walk a little bit tricky of a line where you don't want to sacrifice guys you need to help you make the playoffs, but making it is only half the battle. Once you're in, you want to win, right? This is fantasy football. You shouldn't get shit for just making the playoffs. If you get something for making the playoffs, find a better league.
Well, thank you for checking out Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. If you've got any thoughts on what we said, any other fantasy football questions, anything at all, if you want to do a cross between PCU and BoJack Horseman, we're there for you. We can do it. Let us know. Hit us in the comments. Get us on social media at Seize the Gap FF. Mills will give you all the whatnot, the thumbs, the flaps. Have a good day.
This has been Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. Again, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, on social media at Seize the Gap FF. Do not forget to check out those league settings, your trade deadline, how many teams make your playoffs, and don't forget the flaps. Follow, like, and please subscribe. It's all we ask. If you learned something, we helped you out, anything at all, if you had even a little bit of fun, please give us that little bit of thumb. I'm Magnum Mills. He's Jamie G. And remember, you need to seize the gap and stop being so inefficient.
And I do not care if you're old. You need to seize the gap. Thanks again for checking us out. Don't forget those flaps.